Confirmation hearings for U.S. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh are now just days away. Leftists are finalizing plans for protests and a big media blitz against him. But moderates and conservatives argue Judge Kavanaugh is well qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. They say there's no good reason to deny him confirmation. Among them is legal analyst Kendall Coffey. Mr. Coffey is a former U.S. attorney from the Southern District of Florida. He worked alongside Kavanaugh in the Elian Gonzalez case. Kendall, thanks for joining us from our Washington bureau today. So what was your impression of Brett Kavanaugh back during that Gonzalez case? And how about since he's been on the U.S. Court of Appeals in D.C.?
Well, I was deeply appreciative of his volunteering to join our effort. He came in at a very tough time for us. We lost the appeal, the original appeal, and the next question was the Supreme Court of the United States. And I think he and some of his colleagues who had not been involved in the case up to then recognized that we would need their kind of help for the issues to fairly be presented to the Supreme Court. He volunteered his time. He was a brilliant lawyer, a magnificent colleague, and I was very, very grateful for his efforts. Interestingly, the issue in the Elian Gonzalez case, which is thought about as a best interest of the father kind of case, was actually an issue that is very much getting attention nowadays, a different issue, and that is the power of federal agencies. Do federal agencies have too much power to make law? And that, interestingly enough, was a key issue in the Elian Gonzalez case.
But, Kendall, the National Archives refused a request by Senate Democrats to provide them with documents about Judge Kavanaugh's tenure. Now they're threatening to sue the National Archives. The archives said 900,000 documents couldn't possibly be ready until at least October. Why this document request? We're talking maybe 3-4 times the number of documents required for Elena Kagan, Justice Roberts, or Neil Gorsuch. Is this reasonable, unusual?
Well, he's got a body of legal opinions as a judge. So in a sense, it should be a pretty straightforward process to evaluate his work. The issue of going back into his years when he served as an attorney with the Bush administration may or may not be necessary. If what you're interested in how well someone is qualified to be a United States Supreme Court justice, and if this individual was serving for years and wrote hundreds of opinions on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeal, many regard that as the second most prestigious court in this country, then you'd think his body of work as a judge would be enough to determine whether he should be a justice.
Well, it seems like they're just digging for anything to try to block this confirmation. He served in the George W. Bush White House and also on Ken Starr's legal team in the Whitewater investigation. So how do you think that's being used against him to stop this confirmation?
Well, it's fascinating to see how he has, by his own admission, grown and evolved since the Ken Starr years. He was a hard-charging prosecutor as a team member with Ken Starr, which, of course, as you know, investigated then-President Bill Clinton, ultimately wrote a very tough report. We all know what happened at the time. Since then, though, Brett Kavanaugh has taken a deeper look at whether that kind of investigation is good for this country, whether the Constitution really wants the President of the United States, the most important and powerful person in the world, to be hamstrung, distracted, basically made less effective as the head of the free world because the president has to deal with subpoenas and investigations and a constant drumbeat of issues with respect to an investigation. Brett Kavanaugh ultimately decided that that kind of investigation, even though he'd been a critical figure in the Starr investigation, wasn't good for this country. I think that will be an issue in the confirmation hearings. The argument's going to be that he is not going to, as a Supreme Court justice, be in a position to fairly determine whether or not Donald Trump should be subject to a subpoena. I think that that is not going to be a strong issue, and I think he could obviously solve the issue if he were to say he would recuse himself. But I think that what it really demonstrates is maturity and wisdom. How many of us can be intensely involved in a position and in a career, and at some point later on say, maybe we need to look at the greater good. Maybe we need to rethink what happened years ago.
Well, I remember the White House when the announcement was made that he was gaining the appointment. He said that he keeps an open mind. I think that's one example of it. So, but any chance, we all remember the Robert Bork situation, any chance he'll be borked? So what do you expect beyond what you just said for those confirmation hearings? Any fireworks?
I think his personal qualities will remind us much more of Chief Justice John Roberts than some of those who have come before. He's extremely gracious and courteous and thoughtful and bright. I think people and the country watching the confirmation hearings are going to really like this guy. So, you know, unless there's some prizes that none of us have thought about, I think it's going to be very uphill to try to defeat his confirmation.
Kendall Coffey, we thank you for your insights from Washington. Thanks for being with us.
Okay, thanks for having me on.